The teachings of Rabbi Rav Sprecher, Dean of Students at Diaspora Yeshiva on Mount Zion, Jerusalem.
Today's shir will be, can we invite a Shabbat traveler for a Shabbos meal? We know he's going to drive on Shabbat. Can we invite him to come to our house for Shabbos to enjoy a Shabbos meal? What's the problem with that? The problem with that is, there's a problem lifnei iver lo titen michshol. The Talmud tells us from Sechta Avodah Zarah, how do you know that you're not allowed to give a glass of wine to a Nazir or Eivim and Achai to a Ben Noach? It says, Lifnei iver lo titen michshol. Do not put a stumbling block in front of the blind. You're misleading him. If you're giving a Nazir is not allowed to drink wine, and you give him a glass of wine, you're causing him to sin. No, even a Noachite cannot eat flesh or blood from a living animal, and if you give that to him, you're causing him to sin. So by inviting a Shabbos traveler, aren't we causing him to sin? May we do it? Can we invite him or not? So that the topic will be this afternoon. We're not up to the source sheets yet, but this we'll be discussing. There's a negative commandment in the Torah. Do not put a stumbling block in front of the blind. Now, it's amazing that if you look on the Rambam and Rashi and all the commentaries, if someone were to put a stumbling block, a cinder block in front of a blind person, or a garbage can, would he be transgressing this negative commandment? So according to the oral Torah, no, it's amazing that this is a figure of speech. If someone were to put a garbage can or a cinder block in front of a blind person, literally, he would not transgress this negative commandment. Question is, why not? This is a figure of speech. Putting a stumbling block in front of a blind person, the oral Torah tells us, means strictly not to mislead someone into sin, give him bad advice, cause him to sin, perhaps causing him to drive on Shabbos, or giving a Nazir a glass of wine, or a non-Jew flesh or blood from a living animal. A non-Jew doesn't eat shchita. But the animal has to be dead before the non-Jew can consume flesh and blood. So if you give that to a non-Jew, you transgress giving a stumbling block in front of the blind. But why, when you literally put a stumbling block in front of the blind, why does the oral Torah insist that you don't transgress this negative commandment? That's a very good question. The answer is the Torah does not repeat itself. Literally putting a cinder block in front of a blind person, that's lo tirtzach. That's already covered in the Ten Commandments. It says lo tirtzach. Putting a stumbling block literally in front of a blind person, if the fall will not kill him, the fright will give him a heart attack. So that's already covered in the Ten Commandments. Do not commit murder. So therefore, the oral Torah insists that this verse, putting a stumbling block in front of the blind, can only mean figuratively and not literally. But anyway, getting back to our question over here, aren't you misleading the person by having him come to your house on Shabbos, knowing that he will drive? Aren't you like giving a glass of wine to a Nazir? Or giving Eivim and Achai to a non-Jew? Or is it different? That will we be discussing this afternoon. And there's another problem. The Shulchan Aruch tells us that you're not permitted to give food to a person that you know will not make a bracha. You're causing him to sin. Shulchan Aruch tells us not to give food to a person that you know he will not make a bracha, because again, you're putting a michshol, lifnei iver. You're causing him to sin. You're giving him to eat food, kosher food, but you know he will not make a bracha. Eating without making a bracha is like stealing from God. So the Shulchan Aruch rules that you're not permitted to give food to a person knowing that he will not make a bracha. Again, you're putting a stumbling block in front of the blind. You're causing him to steal from God. So there's another problem. Inviting a person to your house on Shabbos, a secular person, he's driving there, you're giving him the food and he will not make a bracha. There's an additional problem. So can we do it or not? Can we invite a Shabbos traveler and a guy will not make brachas? Can we invite him for a Shabbos meal? So if Shlomo Zalman Auerbach says something amazing, he says it is, you don't have it on your sheets, we're not up to the sheets yet, but we'll tell you when we get there. He says it's permitted to invite an individual who lives far from the place of worship and offer him a place to sleep nearby. In such a fashion, he will not have to violate the Shabbos at all. So you can invite him to come to shul or come to your house, but you have to tell him that I'll put you up for Shabbos. Even if the individual refuses the offer of hospitality, he says, I don't want to sleep, I just want to come to shul with you or to your meal, but I don't want to sleep over. There is no need to advise him to refrain from visiting for that reason. Nor is there any need to caution him not to drive his car on Shabbos. Why not? As long as you tell him, listen, buddy, come to my house for Shabbos, or for a meal, with coming to shul, I'll put you up to sleep. And even if he says, no, I'll just come for the meal or for the service, but I don't want to sleep by you, it's okay to invite him. Rav Sprecher, super Haredi. Why? Well, why is it not putting a stomach back in front of the blind? So Rav Shlomo Zalman says, even if you tell him there's a place to sleep, and even if he refuses, there is no need to caution him not to drive the car to come to your house on Shabbos for a meal or to shul. The question is, why not? So now we get to our source sheets. Side number 1. This comes up all the time. People involved in kiruv work, the person is a secular and you want to bring him closer to religion, you invite him to your house for Shabbos for a meal or to Shabbos shul knowing that he's going to drive there. So is there a way we can do that? Should we do that without transgressing, putting a stumbling block in front of the blind? So if you go to source number 1, why is there a mitzvah to try to bring secular Jews closer to religion? Why do we have to do that in the first place? The Mishnah tells us in Masechta Ovot, it's not on your sheet, but the Mishnah tells you in Masechta Ovot, Hevei b'talmidav shel Aaron HaKohen. A person should be of the disciples of Aaron HaKohen. Oev abriot, loving all people, not just from people, not just Jews. Oev abriot. The Mishnah says, be of the disciples of Aaron HaKohen. Oev abriot, love all human beings. Umakarvan l'Torah, and bring them close to Torah. So the Mishnah says that to be Makarev people, we're following in whose footsteps? Aaron HaKohen, right? To love all people, not just tzaddikim, and bring them what? And bring them close to Torah. But again, if we invite him, we know he's going to drive, and he's not going to make a bracha on the food. Why are we not transgressing lifnei iver? So if you look at side number 1, this is a tshuva from Rabbi Yaakov Ariel. You see that side number 1? It's in English. He says, as I understand, the need to welcome Jews to experience the Shabbos atmosphere can be fulfilled specifically during the day when there is more time. Why is during the day better than a Friday night meal? It seems, therefore, that in extreme case, it is possible to permit inviting guests to the Shabbos day meal, knowing he's going to drive, taking into account the following consideration. Ideally, guests should be invited for the entire Shabbat. However, if the invitee will accept only a partial invitation, it is acceptable to consent and to offer him hospitality until the end of Shabbat, even if you know he will not, won't accept it. You say, I want to eat the meal, I want to go to shul, I'm going to drive home. As long as you tell him he can sleep over, even though if he doesn't, it's okay. This ruling rests on several variables. It is possible that the invited guest might have driven in any case for a different purpose. He's not going to drive to your house for a meal, he'll drive to the beach. Better let him come to shul or to your house rather than driving to the beach, no? And possibly even further, that the individual might have transgressed a greater number of other violations of the Shabbat of a possible greater severity than what? Than of traveling to the home of the host. Knowing that during his stay at the host home, it is presumable that he will not perform any forbidden acts on the Shabbos at all. So, If he's in your house for that couple of hours, he's not going to be Mechal Shabbos. If he's driving somewhere else, he's going to do more malachas on Shabbos. So you're not putting a stumbling block in front of the blind. On the opposite, you are what? Causing him, every moment that you keep Shabbos is a mitzvah. Baal Tshuvas begin becoming religious. They don't tell him keep all Shabbos, it's too hard. Start an hour, 2 hours, slowly. You can't do it in one stop, in one reach. Every minute that you keep Shabbos is another mitzvah. So if you can't do all of it, at least keep a couple of hours of Shabbos. And then eventually you'll graduate. So for those few hours that he's in our house for Shabbos, he will what? He won't be smoking. He won't be playing with the dumb phone. He's in our house for Shabbos. So you're causing him every minute to keep Shabbos. Every moment that you observe Shabbos is noch a mitzvah, another mitzvah. And I'm reading continuing source and side number 1, an additional consideration for leniency. You see that middle of the first paragraph? Is the matter of does one say to another, commit a sin so that your fellow Jew benefits? Is it permissible to say, you commit a sin to benefit another Jew? It was clear, that's in Tractate Shabbat 48, you see that? It was clear to those who posed the question that inviting these non-observant Jews to Shabbos meals is the only way to familiarize them with what? With Jewish values. They don't know anything. The Tinik Shenishba. At least they get to experience a Shabbos table, Divrei Torah, Zemirot. They'll know what Shabbos is all about. They have no idea what it is. So without such an invitation, we are concerned that they will stray from Jewish values to the point of assimilation. All the more so should we permit a questionable violation of an obstacle before the blind in order to observe the Shabbat. For this reason, there are grounds to permit, says Rabbi Yaakov Ariel, there are grounds to permit to invite a person for Shabbos or to shul, knowing he'll drive there and knowing he'll drive away. It's permitted to invite him under these difficult circumstances, inviting such guests for Shabbos meals even during the day, if it's impossible to invite them for the evening meal. So it's okay. Why is it not putting a stumbling block in front of the blind? Because your intention is not to mislead him. The opposite, your intention is what? To bring him close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Not putting a stumbling block in front of the blind. The guy doesn't even know that he's blind. He doesn't realize what Shabbos is. He's totally alienated. Now, if you look at the bottom of side number 1, Shailu Chu is Minchas Shlomo. You see that? This is great. The Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, the super Haredi rabbi. He says an amazing over here. It's underlined in yellow on side number 1, right? Shailu Chu Minchas Shlomo. He's thinking about, he was asked this question, can I invite a Shabbos traveler to my shul, to my house for Shabbos, knowing he's going to go by car? So the great rabbi says, I'm thinking about it. Shenochon, the emet, not only can you invite him, but you can give him food, knowing he's not going to make a bracha. You don't have to worry that you're putting a stumbling block in front of the blind. What stumbling block? Number 1, you're causing him to drive on Shabbos. Number 2, he's not going to make a bracha on the food. Someone who eats without a bracha, says the Gemara in Brachos, is like stealing from God. Anyone who eats without a bracha is like stealing from God. So he's eating without a bracha, so he's causing another stumbling block. No. Says the Shlomo Zalman, no. B'chol mokaim b'nidoin zeh, hayil v'chol ha'iseh shel ha'noisen lo yilech l'rak averish l'shida michshol. V'kiven shim lo yiten lo yilechol, if you don't give him to eat, if you invite him and you don't give him to eat, right? Then this guy will think you're nuts. You're inviting him to your house. You're not going to give him to eat because he's not going to make a bracha. What are these frum Jews are crazy? Why did he invite me for? To stare at the walls, right? Nimsa deleka klal shimavera. There's no sin of lifnei iver, not by inviting him and even giving him food, knowing that he's not going to make what? A bracha. Kivin the leka hachoshim nesinas michsha. It's not called putting a stumbling block in front of the blind, and we'll see why not. Ela adarabba, yesh kan hatzala, mimilsha godol. You are saved in what does hatzala mean? Rescue. You're saving him. He's like a person that's drowning, and he doesn't even know that. He's drowning in a sea of assimilation. He doesn't know that. You're saving him from a terrible michshol. How do you say michshol in English? Stumbling block. What's the greatest stumbling block? To be assimilated. You hear what he's saying over here? So the great Mincha Shlomo Zalman Auerbach says that there's no problem of lifnei iver. You can invite him, even though he's going to drive, and you can give him food without making a bracha, because you're engaged in an act of hatzalas neshamos, hatzalat nefoshot. And we'll see why soon. Now look at the next tshuva. This is in English. From Moshe Sternbuch, the great posek, the bottom of side number 1. And Moshe Sternbuch, there are plenty of source sheets here. It seems that the basis, bottom of side number 1, Moshe Sternbuch, it seems that the basis of the prohibition of putting an obstacle in front of the blind is its similarity to the case of a blind person who's caused to stumble. Now, if you do it literally, we said you don't transgress that, because that's already lo tirtzach. Literally putting a cinder block in front of a blind guy, you're killing him. If the fall won't kill him, he'll die of a heart attack. So this is only a metaphor. But the metaphor means that the guy has to be blind in the matter. However, if the host's intention is only for what? Benefit. His guest's benefit, he cannot be considered as placing an obstacle in front of the blind. Just as a surgeon is not guilty of stabbing his patient. The surgeon takes out a butcher knife and he cuts the patient open. Is he a murderer? But he's using a knife. But what's his intention, says Rav Sternbuch? The intention of the host is to save this person from assimilation. He's like a surgeon who's not guilty of stabbing a patient when he uses a butcher knife on him. Is he stabbing him? He's saving his life. So too over here, you invite an assimilated Jew, you are saving his neshama. I'm involved with the organization called Archim. I have the schus to be involved with them. Archim has people coming to their seminaries, their seminars, even if they will travel on Shabbos. They have seminars all over the country on Shabbat, in different locations. People drive up by car on Shabbat. And they allow it. Because, why do they allow it? Because we know bekuach nefesh doche kol Torah kula. If your life is in danger, can you desecrate the Shabbos to save the person's body? So for sure, it's bekuach nefesh to rescue and save the person's neshama. It's atzalat afalash mamish. So this person, if he was in physical danger, can you break the Shabbos for him? Yes. So these people, these secular Jews, are in spiritual danger. Their neshama is being lost. So if you can save a person on Shabbos, you can save his body, you can certainly save his neshama. And therefore, this organization, Archim, allows people to drive up on Shabbos to attend their Bal Tshuva seminaries or seminars. Because it's an act of atzalat nefashot. Not just saving their body, saving their godly soul. And the track record is amazing. They have a 50% track record. 50% of the people that come to Archim seminars, who are totally secular, 50% of them become Baal Tshuvas. Wow. So the founder of the organization went to Rav Elyashiv Zatzal. He said, listen, I'm 50%, but the other 50%, I'm a failure. He says, you're not a failure. It's 100%. 50%, they are coming back now. The other 50%, maybe their grandchildren will come back. Their children will come back. You plant a seed. They hear a word of Torah. You push their buttons, so even if they don't come back, 50% do. But the other 50% who don't, said Rav Elyashiv, you're not a failure. Perhaps their children will come back, their grandchildren will come back because of what they heard at your seminar. And therefore, let them come on Shabbos. It's an act of saving their godly soul. If you can break the Shabbos to save a person's life, you can certainly break the Shabbos to save a person's soul. And this is an act of Atzalas Nefashot. And therefore, these people drive to their seminaries on Shabbos. The organization is called Archim. What does Archim mean? Values. The founder of this organization, he himself belonged to the Jewish mafia in the Bronx. A totally assimilated Jew. And he saw the light, and he started this organization, Archim. It's incredible. He is the role model. If he never would have been who he was, he never would have been the great Baal Tshuva. He says, if I can be Tshuva, you guys can do it. An amazing story of this organization is called Archim, Values in Life. What's important in life? Let's go to side number 2. This is again Rav Sternbuch. Continues his tshuva on side number 2. Elsewhere, I have cited the opinion of Mishnah Brura that a father must care for his daughter lest she leave the faith, since he is her custodian and her flesh and blood. Family members, therefore, have a special obligation to reach out. A person goes off to derech. Rabbi Elyashiv was asked an amazing question. This is unbelievable. A Haredi family with many kids. One kid went off to derech completely. So he went to Rav Elyashiv, the father. He says, listen, I want to kick him out of the house. Why? Because, what I say, a bad apple spoils the barrel. Because he is totally secular now, and he's going to be a negative, bad influence on his siblings. So I want to kick him out of the house. Well, Elyashiv said, you want to kick somebody out of the house, you kick out the religious siblings. He stays in your house. This is Rabbi Elyashiv, Zecher Tzadik Levracha. You want to kick him out of the house? Are you nuts? He's your beloved child. You're afraid that the siblings will become what? Influenced? Kick them out of the house. Farm them out. But the wayward child, he must remain in your house and show him extra love. Rav Elyashiv, Zecher Tzadik Levracha, said that. Wow. Family members have a special obligation. I'm reading the top of number 2. The reason for this obligation arises not only from the charity that a Jew is obligated to provide for every other Jew, but also from the principle of redemption of relatives. One must make every possible effort to rescue relatives who violate the Shabbos. This is a special halacha. Now let's get to Rav Aaron Lichtenstein, the great posek, Rav Soloveitchik's son-in-law. Zecher Tzadik Levracha. Rav Aaron Lichtenstein was asked this question about inviting secular Jews for Shabbos. So let's read the tshuva with him. Practically, Rav Aaron Lichtenstein says, especially in our modern context, Rav Moshe's response is very difficult to apply. Rav Moshe says you can't do it. Rav Moshe says, with Neiver, you're setting him up for a sin. Rav Moshe says you cannot do it. But the other poskim disagree. Rav Aaron Lichtenstein says it's hard to accept Rav Moshe's pshat, putting it into effect would have far-reaching and negative effects on many synagogues in the diaspora. But even if one is not willing to accept Rav Shlomo Zalman's leniency with regard to lifnei iver, putting a stumbling block in front of the blind, which it's not, it is more plausible to apply it to mesit. Mesit means that you're causing a person to sin. But Moshe says you can't invite a Shabbos desecrator, you're causing him to sin. That's called mesit. Rav Aaron Lichtenstein said he does not agree. The mesit is guilty of trying to force another to stray from the proper path in life. It is difficult to call one who is basically interested in someone else's spiritual benefit a mesit, a seducer. It's the opposite. Here, it is sensible to take into account the larger picture when assessing whether incitement of sin takes place. Next paragraph, when another would not be able to sin without help. The Nazir is on one side of the river, and the wine is on the other side, and he can only get it, but you give it to him. That's putting a stumbling block in front of the blind. When another could sin without outside help, when the Nazir is on the same side of the river as the wine, there's much more room to be lenient. Many hold that Lifnei Iver does not apply at all, according to the Ramah, if the guy was going to do it anyway. Even if there's a rabbinic prohibition, there's room to permit educational programming. You don't want to mislead the guy. The opposite. You want to educate him the beauty of a Shabbat, what it means to be a loyal Jew, the beauty in it. There's room to permit educational programming that will help bring the participants closer to God. Even if it is clear that they will not become fully observant halachic Jews, it doesn't matter. Get a Jew to do one mitzvah. Keep Shabbos even 5-10 minutes. Also tremendous value. Non-educational activities that would involve others desecrating Shabbos will certainly be prohibited. It has to be for education. He comes to your Shabbos table, he's becoming educated, not just a cholent and a kugel. He hears Divrei Torah, he hears Zemirot. Like my fire, the Pintalayit can get ignited. There are, of course, additional elements of this problem besides the formal and legal questions of Lifnei Iver is involved. The question raises, for example, the communal issue of participation in activities that are against the halacha, scheduled programming which will involve Shabbos desecration might be considered a stamp of approval, which is not so. Other issues must clearly be taken into account beside Lifnei Iver. So, what's the bottom line? Rav Shlomo Zalman rules, the last paragraph on number 2, that an individual, this is the punchline, Rav Shlomo Zalman rules that an individual is permitted to invite non-Shabbos observing guests for a Shabbos meal, provided that he explicitly offers them sleeping arrangements in the neighborhood that will enable them to avoid desecrating Shabbat. This is permissible, even if the guest eventually refuses the invitation. I want to come for the meal and drive home. Doesn't matter. As long as you told him he can stay. If he doesn't want to stay, that's not your problem. One should be careful to apply this only when there are educational objectives in mind. This relates to a private situation that arises in the public sphere. The problem is very serious because of two conflicting goals. There's a dilemma here. On the one hand, the educational frameworks are very important. On the other hand, it is problematic for an institution like a shul to appear to lend a hand to what? To Shabbos desecration. The shul is making a Friday night dinner. The shul is making a Shabbos lunch, and people are driving there. Of course, they'll get educated, but it's like you are publicly advocating that it's okay to drive on Shabbos. You don't mean that, but that's what's coming out. To take a specific example, says Rav Aaron Lichtenstein, you see that? I was asked about this issue with regard to Jewish communities in Russia, taking into account the desperate educational needs of these communities. I ruled that it is desirable to retain these very valuable educational programs. However, every effort should be made to arrange for what? Sleeping within walking distance of the shul. It should be made clear that people should arrive by foot. And if the guest chooses to drive, it's not your concern. So that's the bottom line. As long as you tell the guest, you're welcome to sleep over in my house. Even if he says, no, I just want to come for the meal or for the service, it's okay. As long as you made that option available to him. And it's not lifnei iver, you're not putting a stumbling block in front of the blind. It's the opposite. You don't want to mislead him, just like the surgeon who picks up a knife to carve up the patient. Is the surgeon want to harm the patient? He wants to what? Cure him. So here, the object of your telling him to come on Shabbos, you want to cure his neshama. It's not lifnei iver at all, says Rav Shlomo Zalman, Rav Aaron Lichtenstein, Rav Sternbuch. It's not misleading him at all. It's just the opposite. He gets a taste of a Shabbos, not just physical taste. The cholent You know the story with the Rabbi Yehuda Nasi and Antoninus. It's a true story. Look in the Gemara in Sanhedrin. Marcus Aurelius was very good friends with Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. Marcus Aurelius, Antoninus. So Rabbi invited him once for a delicious Shabbos afternoon meal. So Anthony gives him the cholent, the kugel, the kishka, and it's delicious. So Anthony tells Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, listen, after Shabbos, please write down all of the ingredients and give it to my chef in the palace. I want to have this delicious meal in my palace, what I had by you, Rabbi. The cholent, the kishka, the kugel, whatever you say. After Shabbos, Rabbi, please write it down and give it to my chef. And don't leave out any ingredients. Rabbi said, fine. After Havdalah, he writes it all down and he gives it to Anthony's chef. A few days later, Mark Anthony sends him an email and calls him up. He says, listen, you cheated me. The meal that my chef prepared is not as delicious as I ate at your Shabbos table. You must have left something out. You shortchanged me. Rabbi said, I didn't shortchange you. I gave the exact ingredients. But one ingredient I couldn't give you. What's that? Shabbos Kodesh. And it's true. The same cholent that you eat on Sunday doesn't taste like on Shabbos. It doesn't taste as good. So I gave you all the ingredients, Mark Anthony. I didn't cheat you, but I couldn't give you the Kiddush of Shabbat. It's in there, or it's not in there. Remember that commercial? It's in there. And it's so true. The food doesn't taste the same on Sunday or Monday as it does on Shabbat. The special ingredient. So when the Baal Tshuva, or the potential Baal Tshuva, comes to our home and experiences the delicious Shabbos meal and the secret ingredient of Shabbos Kodesh, that can turn them on. That can ignite, how do you say, the Pintel Yid, right? Light my fire. And therefore, you're not misleading the blind. You are involved in Atzalat Nefoshot. You're saving the person's life. Not just his physical life. You're saving his what? His godly soul. And therefore, reach out and touch someone. It's a great mitzvah to invite a secular neighbor to your home on Shabbos, even if he has to drive, because we have to follow Aaron HaKohen. The Mishnah says to love all people and bring them close to Torah, not just religious people. So we have to remember that.
For more of Rabbi Sprecher's teachings, visit rabbisprecher.com.